was a child in Paris. I was born in 1934 to American parents. And my father and mother met in France and decided to remain there to live. My mother was originally from a little town in northern Maine. My dad was a New Yorker, and he was a Jewish. He didn't practice Judaism, but his whole family was Jewish, and that was his heritage. Because of the way it was in those days, there were the poor, and then there were the people that were not poor. There was really not much of a middle class. So I had a nanny, and my nanny was Germaine, and I dearly loved her, and I spent a lot more time with Germaine, who wore a black uniform with a white apron and only spoke French. And I was very close to her because we spent our entire days together. The Germans invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. I had just turned 5 years old. And somehow a decision was made, and I don't know how. I was sent to America. On September 10th, I was on a ship, the SS Washington, an American ship out of Le Havre, with a woman I'd never really met before, Madame Selby. She was really an American. Her name was not Madame, it was Mrs. Selby, I think. But anyway, I called her Madame Selby. And she had this little dog, and I love dogs, so I was willing to go with this perfect stranger and her dog, as long as I could walk the dog on the deck. Maybe part of the decision that my parents made about sending me to America was that they thought that I was being frightened by Germaine's memories of the First World War. She really hated the Germans. She called them the Boche. And the way I remember it, she said that she had been bombed. And so she told me these stories, and I had a nightmare one night. And I remember the nightmare. It was a yellow plane. And now the way I remember it, it had a swastika on the wings, but I don't know if I added that to my memory bank. But I remember the plane really was very pretty looking. And it flew through the blue sky and came down toward me, and it had a bomb. And I woke up and threw up on the bed. And I lay there for a little while, wondering what to do. I didn't want to wake my parents, but I finally did. And it was apparently in that time frame that the decision was made to send me to America to live with my mother's sister and her husband in Presque Isle, Maine, which is way up in the northmost county of Maine, Aroostook County. So anyway, by September 10th, I was sitting in the car, one of an old 1930s car in the back seat, and I remember I had a plaid blanket on my lap, and I was wearing a coat and hat that Germaine had made for me. It was velvet, blue velvet, a little hat with two corners and it tied in a bow, and a little coat that sort of flared out that was also a blue velvet, and I had on an ermine collar, a real white ermine, with a little hook, so his little nose hooked to the little hind end, and the little tails with a tail with black tip that hung down. And Germaine had also made a similar outfit for my doll, and I was holding my doll, and the doll had, I think, a rabbit fur, a little furry thing to mimic my ermine. And I can remember Germaine in her uniform standing by the curb and saying, "Soon you'll return." Of course, she said it in French. And I said, "Perhaps, but I don't think so." And I have no idea why I said that or how it was that I sort of knew that this was a very huge event and that life was going to change profoundly. I was picked up in Boston 5 days later by my aunt and uncle, whom I had met once before, but they spoke only English and I spoke only French. And I was very determined to learn English, and that year I went to kindergarten in Presque Isle, Maine, and I learned to speak English, and my Aunt Pearl hired a woman to speak French to me so I wouldn't lose the language, but I said, I'm an American girl now. And my uncle just doted on me and told stories about me at the Rotary Club. What I would say, like, "Les mosquitos n'est pas gentil." And that was because I wasn't accustomed to mosquitoes in Paris, but there were lots of mosquitoes in northern Maine, and they bit. July 14th, no, 16th and 17th, 1942, when over 13,000 Jewish families were rounded up and imprisoned in the Velodrome. The French police did this. The French government, as you may know, had capitulated to the Germans, who had invaded in 1940. I had missed them by about 6 months, because by June 9th of 1940, they'd come into France. So the occupation had been going on for 2 years. So these Jewish families were rounded up, and this is by the French government. This is not by the German occupiers. This was a French idea. And the children were separated from their parents, and then they were put on trains and transported to concentration camps where they were gassed. And by the end of the war, 78,000 Jews were sent to concentration camps. And of those 78,000, only 2,500 returned. So if I had been born a French child, I would have been there. My father was Jewish. I would have likely been one of those children.